Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sin City Living. Welcome to the first episode of our newest series. This series will be devoted to history of Las Vegas and the more interesting, the oddball stuff. Probably going to see a lot of mob stuff in this, in which case possibly my wife may make an appearance. She is rather fascinated with the mob, but she's also rather not fascinated with the camera. So we'll see on that one. But we're going to be doing a lot of interesting things just related to Vegas and Vegas history for this particular show. This show will be every Thursday night, so look for us Thursday nights, probably 7 p.m. our time. And again, all things related to Vegas history, from the mob's roots to maybe the real story behind the story of casino. But for our inaugural one, just like with our other show on the darker side of Vegas, where I didn't want to just dive right into the blood and guts and serial killers and unsolved murders and solved murders and stuff like that, and I kept it a little more PG with just a elderly bank robber. On this one, I want to go with possibly the best or greatest cheater in the history of Vegas. I'm going to have a lot of shows about cheaters. There's some fascinating ways that people have cheated casinos, cheated in slots, teams, even teams that included employees. There's some absolutely fascinating stuff. But one person in particular just kind of stands above all the rest as far as cheating within Vegas and cheating with Vegas games. And his name is Tommy Glenn Carmichael. Now, you're probably going to see me look down at my notes fairly often. This guy has quite the history. It's really involved. He was very prolific, so I wasn't really able to memorize all of this stuff right away. So he was born, Tommy Glenn Carmichael was born in the mid-50s. So this is way back in the day, as my wife likes to say. You know, I'm probably old enough to have remembered this. I'm not. But born in the mid-50s, and as a child he was very, very fascinated with technology. Now, the tech back then, to us nowadays, the tech back then, we would look at it and go, oh, that's adorable, or we'd look at it and go, what is that, from the 1800s? Just because of how much tech has advanced in these days. Back then, what was cutting edge technology to us nowadays is the kind of stuff that you make in your third grade science class. You might kludge together a cathode ray TV, cathode ray tube TV setup, whereas back then that was cutting edge technology, like 10K plasma kind of stuff. So he was fascinated with all of that stuff. He would break things down just to figure them out, and if he was anything like me or most of my friends, when he put things back together, he always ended up with extra parts that everything still worked fine somehow. So that's, by the way, why I never became a mechanic. So when he grew up, he decided he moved to or was living in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma is okay. Stupidest state motto in the world, and was a TV sales and repairman. And as my wife likes to remind me, she's from Oklahoma, and I know that. And that's once she left, Oklahoma was only okay. So he he opened a TV repair, sales and repair business. And at the time, he was doing fairly well because it was the only one in town. But over time, more and more of them opened, and he was losing money. He wasn't able to continue to be profitable. And that tends to happen with a lot of those kind of tech and repair businesses. That's why you don't see very many standalone computer repair shops anymore. And that's about as cutting edge as it gets right now in today's world. You don't see a whole lot of those shops anymore. And the ones you do see typically make most of their revenue selling computers that they build. Just like you don't see back when I was a kid, you would actually see like vacuum repair shops, and that doesn't exist anymore, because as time goes on, either more people enter the business, or the the technology progresses to such a point where it's actually cheaper to replace than to buy. We run into that with computers all the time. Your computer fries, your laptop fries, and you go get it looked at, and you don't go to a computer repair shop, you go to a big box store that also happens to have a computer repair shop in it, and they'll tell you, oh, you need a new motherboard, it's gonna cost you $350. Or you could just buy this new $300 laptop over here. So his business was struggling, and it was struggling pretty bad. And so was his personal life. His business closed, and the timing almost coincided perfectly with his third divorce. So this guy was a slow learner. Let's put it that way. A slow learner. Or he had really bad taste. One or the other. Or both. Quite possibly both. And to top it all off, he was also still working on community service for a prior drug charge that he had. Now, around this time, he had a friend of his show up and basically changed the entire direction of his life. He popped open the trunk of his car, or had Tommy pop it open, and inside was a miniature slot machine and a classic cheater's tool known as a top-bottom joint. So Carmichael, being Carmichael, took this slot machine and took it apart. I took it apart because he was curious how it worked. Now, keep in mind, back then, the slot machines were all mechanical. Nowadays, the slot machines are all computerized. What you see on the screen is basically just a random assortment of pixels. Before anything even moves on that screen, the decision has already been made on what you want, if anything, and how much. And then it just lines up the images on the screen to match that. But back then, the slot machines were all mechanical. So nowadays, we have these massive jackpots because we can have this computer chip figure out, say that, okay, a jackpot is a 1 in 100 million odds. And then therefore we can make these jackpots based on that. Whereas back then, it being all mechanical, it really was much more of a random chance, but the odds were actually better than nowadays for hitting like the max jackpots, the 777s or whatever it may be. So since it was all mechanical, it was very, very easy for Carmichael, who has been doing this kind of stuff since he was a kid, to take it apart and absolutely figure out how to use this top-bottom joint cheater's tool to his advantage. And I will see if I can find a picture of the cheater's tool and put it on here for you guys. So after a lot of practice, after he's taken apart, figured out exactly how this cheating tool works and what would be the optimal way to use it, he decides, okay, he's got it down. He's ready. Let's go try this out. So they go from Oklahoma to Vegas. Of course, where else are you going to go to try it? Especially back then, pretty much the only casinos back then were Vegas or Atlantic City. So they head on out to Vegas, and he decides that he wants to start out trying his strategy on a nickel machine. Now, nowadays you hear a nickel machine and you think, a low limit, that's nothing. But back then, the nickel machine was pretty much the equivalent of $1 or $5 machine would be today. Plus nowadays actually some of the highest minimum bet machines are penny machines anyway. So he managed to win $35 like that. I mean, just super fast. So he then moved around. He was smart enough not to just keep hitting one casino over and over and over and over again. He moved around. He would do little hits, $35 here, which doesn't sound like a lot, but again, we're talking the currency of 60 years ago, 50 years ago. So that was huge back then, absolutely massive. And he travels around to all these casinos trying to use this tool and wins almost $10,000 in that weekend. $10,000. In today's money, I haven't run the math on this or anything like that, but I'm going to make a wild guess and say in today's money that would have been the equivalent easily in the six figures. Easily. Because back then new cars were $2,000-$3,000 max. So nowadays new cars are $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. So $10,000 in one weekend. Okay, maybe not quite that much money. I mean, we are talking in the 80s, but even in the 80s, your new cars were between $5,000 to $10,000. So, he won $10,000 in a weekend. That's pretty amazing. So he thought he had the winning formula. So he spent the next few years winning millions of dollars from the casinos. Millions of dollars in the 80s. That's just absolutely huge. Now, the casinos were becoming more and more aware of cheaters, and because obviously he wasn't the only one. I mean, he didn't even invent this tool. Someone else invented it, and he just figured out the best way to use it. And unlike most of those cheaters, he actually went and opened up a slot and went through the guts and figured out how it worked. Most of those cheaters just learn how to use the tool, insert here, twist a couple times, boom, you get money kind of thing. He actually went and figured out why it worked. So the casinos are becoming more and more aware of these things and of the cheaters and the methods of cheating, and especially that particular tool that he was using. So they were beginning to update their machinery and beginning to update what they had. And they started using RNGs, or random number generators, which is what is used nowadays, only much smaller, basically a computer chip. Nowadays, it's basically a computer. So they were starting to use random number generator chips in their machines. But Carmichael was smart enough to know about those and to know that his method that he had was not going to be able to beat those. So he kept himself with the smaller casinos. Instead of going to the big name places, he kept with the smaller casinos that were not able to afford to update all their slot machines to these RNGs. Instead, they kept with the older style slots, plus those places, also the off-strip kind of casinos in Vegas, they actually kind of find their niche in the fact that a lot of times they are a little bit more retro to the strip casinos. You'll find the newest and greatest slot games on the strip, but oftentimes you'll find ones off the strip that are 5, 6, 7, 8 years older that maybe you loved to play back then. So that's kind of the shtick for some of the off-strip places as well. So he kept going to all these off-strip places and continued winning and winning and winning and winning and winning. Now, these smaller gambling halls, they weren't able to afford the technology to upgrade all of their stuff, but by going to these smaller places, it was also making it much easier for him to be singled out. He stood out a lot more in a smaller gambling hall that maybe only had 100, 200 slots versus a big, massive casino, although back then they weren't that massive, but a big casino that might have 1,000 or 2,000 slots. So they were becoming more aware of him, and the police were also becoming more aware of him. Unknown to Tommy, the police already knew about him. They knew about him, and they were following him. They were following him for approximately a week, give or take, a little more, a little less, to make sure they had all the evidence they needed on him. As soon as they had all the evidence necessary to arrest him and to convict him, they went ahead and did it. They went ahead and arrested him. They arrested him in a Denny's parking lot. Now, he wanted to say that, so Denny's has been around that long, and I'm pretty sure most of the Denny's I've been in have actually, that particular location has been around that long, because every Denny's I've been in is extremely ancient, and most of the waitresses probably opened them. So he tried to claim he was innocent. He says, "No way, I don't cheat at slots. I would never do such a thing." And in his coat pocket, they found the top-bottom joint cheating device that has only one use: cheating in slots. So made it a little bit difficult for him to claim innocence. So he was convicted, and he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. 5 years in prison, which, frankly, for someone who won millions of dollars, is not too shabby. It's kind of a short sentence. I mean, depending on age, if I was 25 and I managed to squirrel away millions and millions and millions of dollars in today's money, and just had to go get locked up for 5 years, I might trade back then. Nowadays, 5 years is a pretty significant portion of whatever time my old ass may have left. But back then, so 5 years really isn't that crazy. And that 5 years, is also because he was still on probation for drug possession. So he could have been sentenced even less if he didn't have these drug charges and probation, and probably crossing state lines while he was on probation. I'm sure that was an additional hit. So what's interesting is while he was in prison, he met somebody else, a Michael Balsamo, who, oddly enough, was in prison for almost the exact same thing, cheating. Now, that's one of the things that people talk about with prisons all the time, is that it's not so much about rehabilitation anymore as it's more about criminal university. Like while you're being a criminal, while you're out there committing your crimes, you are in junior high or high school. Then you go to prison, and it's the graduate course of crime. So he meets someone else who was spending time for similar things. So they, of course, start talking. They've got 5 years. That's a lot of time to sit there and talk. You either end up throttling each other, or you end up spending a lot of time talking and getting along pretty well. So they started discussing what they could do once they got released, because naturally they weren't being rehabilitated. They were both completely enamored with the money. So instead of deciding, how are we going to team up and go straight when we get out of prison, it's how are we going to team up and rob the casinos for even more money when we get out of prison. So they're sitting there discussing all of these things, and they realize once they are released that all their old methods won't work. It's been 5 years now, 5 years that they've been stuck in prison. They haven't seen the new technology coming out. They haven't had time to learn it, anything along those lines. So they come out, they look around, and they realize that what they know how to do, the top-bottom joint, and just what Carmichael knew about the slots just from having taken it apart, doesn't apply anymore. It's invalid. It doesn't exist. So now they have to figure out what to do with all these new advances in the slot technology. Now, one of the major advances that came about during that time period, video poker machines. Video poker machines came out. They had been launched by Bally and International Game Technology just a few months before these guys were released from prison. And this thing operated entirely on random number generators, but they were called enhanced random number generators and microprocessors. And I can kind of see that, because you need not just the random number generator, but you also need some computer processors to be able to link random numbers and translate them into cards and make sure you still only have 52 cards and all of that stuff. So they decided that they were going to have to figure out a way to overcome this. They were going to have to figure out how they could defeat these new advanced machines. But they didn't have the bankroll to do it. They just got out of prison. They had nothing. So Tommy ended up having to work a series of minimum wage and part-time jobs to build up the capital to, you'll never guess, buy a video poker machine. So after working this series of minimum wage jobs and part-time jobs to build up a bankroll, he went and he bought a video poker machine. And that's the thing about Carmichael. This guy was brilliant. I mean, he taught himself from a very young age how to take things apart, put them back together, figure out how they worked. When he decides he wants to open up another machine and figure out how it works, he goes and he works. He goes and gets a job and he works and he makes money and saves up the money in order to buy a machine. I know people that are working full-time, non-minimum wage jobs, but good middle-class income jobs that have been working them for years that could not go out right now, right this second, and buy a video poker machine. They haven't saved up enough money. And yet this guy had the work ethic to be able to do it on a minimum wage job and part-time job, save up the money to be able to do this. If this guy would have taken his intelligence and his work ethic and just directed it into the proper forms, he would have been fine. Although in the end, it does end up working out rather well for him, just like Frank Abagnale. But so he buys the machine. Buys a video poker machine, he takes it apart, and what's fascinating about this is he doesn't go and start learning computers and microprocessors and random number generators. He opens it up and he figures out how it works, and he figures out a way to beat it mechanically. And he ends up creating something called a monkey's paw. Now, the monkey's paw, and I've read about these, I've seen them, I'll see if I can find a picture to put on here. The monkey's paw is a tool that went up the chute of the video poker machine, and it basically flipped the switch to trigger a payout, and then it would just pay out. Because again, this is with the older machines where the coins would drop. I don't know how many of my viewers are old enough to have played slots like that. I remember that. I remember when you'd hit something, and not even a jackpot, you'd hit something mid-range, you'd have to grab one of the cardboard buckets to sit there and scoop the coins out, because if you didn't, it was going to overflow.
But Fremont still has machines that do that.
And my wife tells me that the Fremont still has some machines that do that. So the monkey's paw worked fantastic for him, and he was able to use the monkey's paw to earn thousands of dollars every night. And again, this is in the 80s. He might be crossing in the early 90s right now. I don't have an exact timeline for this, but again, this is 30 years ago, over 30 or more years ago. So thousands of dollars a night was a pretty solid score. And considering he won millions prior to getting arrested, clearly he had the high of pulling this off, because he more than made enough money to have retired very, very well. And at some point, I will do an episode on a cheater that did do that, was never caught, and used his money to retire. So he was making thousands of dollars a night with his monkey paw, but of course, they were on to the cheating, not necessarily on to him yet, but they were on to the cheating, and the technology is constantly improving with these slot machines. They're always trying to make them better so that people can't do this kind of stuff. So he was always having to update his methods. So once the monkey paw wasn't the best method anymore, he needed to figure out what would be the best method. So this time, instead of buying a machine, he just disguised himself as a customer that was interested in buying a machine, and convinced them to open up the machine and show him how it worked. This alone, just seeing the insides, being told how it works, this alone was enough information for this guy to figure out a new tool. Again, Carmichael was brilliant. This guy was really, really sharp. So he figured out a new tool called a light wand, and it worked almost identical to the monkey's paw. Only instead of being a mechanical flip to the switch, what the light wand did was it now went up the chute again, but then it used a light to trigger the photosensitive receptor that would trigger the payout. Because as they were continuing to update things, they realized the mechanical way of the payout was easy to defeat, so they came up with the photo cells and such like that. So then he came up with the light wand. I mean, it's like a chess match. You know, the casinos do this and the technology does this, and Carmichael says, okay, well, I'm going to move right here, you know, or hey, here, king me. You know, chess, checkers, I'm mixing games at this point. Now, it worked so well that Carmichael was not just benefiting from his cheating. He was benefiting from his inventions. He was selling the monkey paw, the light wand, and his methods on the black market to other cheaters, right? Which, personally, I think that would have been a bad call. If I came up with something like this, having already been in prison once, you would think that he would not want this big ring of cheaters running around doing the same thing he's doing. You wouldn't want, not to mention they keep changing the technology as the cheating keeps hitting. So you would think he would want to try and limit it, and you'd think he's making enough money, but no, he's over there selling his stuff on the black market just for the hell of it. And that's, you have to figure that's probably what it was. It was probably an ego trip. Like, these guys are coming to me. I'm the grand master of this. I'm the yogi on top of the mountain that they're climbing up to try and get the secrets from. That's had to be what was going through his head. So he made so much money and was being so successful on it that he decided to take a vacation. He decided to go on a world cruise and cheat. Basically, he took a show on the road. And he took a 6-month trip going around the world, hitting casinos, hitting cruise ships, just hitting slots, hitting video poker slots, and making more money. So apparently he won nearly $100,000 in his 6-month trip. Now, I should probably do the air quotations when I say won. Didn't really win. He received nearly $100,000 over a 6-month period. And that shows you, by the way, how much the technology had progressed to where even though he created and invented this new tool and all that, he was winning a fraction of what he won prior to getting arrested when he won millions. He's winning, of course, $100,000 in 6 months back in that time frame is still pretty amazing. So after 6 months, he returns to Nevada, and he ends up teaming up with a Ramon David Pereira, probably mispronouncing that, and his former partner Michael Balsamo, and they formed one of the most well-known groups of cheating professionals that has ever existed. So Carmichael, teaming up with his former partner and another cheater, formed this ring, this group of cheaters, and they had it very, very structured, very, very regimented. They would have lookouts, keeping an eye for security and probably managers and slot techs and all of that stuff, and even other customers. And they had blockers. They had people that would, it's almost like Ocean's 11 where they let go of the balloons and block the camera. They would have people that would stand in ways to block the view of the slot, or at least his arm and what he was doing and what this group was doing. And what's crazy is they were bringing in an average of $5 million a day. A day. $5 million a day. That is ridiculous. That is insane. The fact that they didn't just retire after a week tells you how much of a psychological high they were getting off of this stuff, that they had to keep doing it. They couldn't stop themselves. So they're breaking in all this money. They're even going on trips. They're going to Atlantic City and they're cleaning out Atlantic City. Now Carmichael ended up, him and his crew, they ended up hitting every single casino on the strip. They basically robbed and raped and molested the video poker machines for every casino in Las Vegas, definitely on the strip, and in Atlantic City. And considering they were going on the road and traveling, these guys probably hit every damn casino in the United States. $5 million a day. And they kept this up for years and years and years. 4 years until near the end of 1996. Him and his crew are going to the Circus in North Las Vegas. Back then, this was one of the premier spots. Nowadays, that the North Vegas, it's the South Strip that's the real premier spot. But back then, the North Strip was the main spot. So his crew was over there at the Circus, and they're getting ready to do the same thing they've been doing every day for 4 years, making idiotic amounts of money. Just as he's getting ready to start using his light wand, he gets swarmed by security and cuffed, taken into custody, turned over to the cops. What Tommy was not aware of is that the casinos had not just upgraded their slot machines, but they had upgraded their camera systems. And by upgrading the camera systems, their new camera systems were able to see past the men who were blocking the other cameras. And that's what led to him being caught. Now, this time around, he was charged with multiple things. He was charged with multiple counts of cheating. He was charged with possessing a cheating device and manufacturing a cheating device. Nevada takes cheating very, 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 very seriously. There are a lot of laws on the books related to casinos and gambling and cheating. So there wasn't enough evidence, apparently, to retain him for very long, and he was released in less than a day. He was arrested multiple times, continuously arrested, because, at that point, he'd be on the radar again. He's already a recidivist, having been in jail once for cheating. So eventually he was federally convicted as the leader of America's most wanted cheating operation. Because again, they traveled around the damn country. They hit everybody. They were huge. $5 million a day back in the 90s. It's insane. So here's the thing. He was sentenced to 1 year of prison. 1 year. I will trade a year in prison for 4 years worth of $5 million a day in a heartbeat. I can promise you that. And I can almost guarantee that my wife will cheerfully put me in prison for a year in exchange for $5 million a day, 4 years worth of $5 million a day. Guaranteed. That's amazing. And he got three years of probation. His houses were repossessed, and he was forced to stay away from all casinos until after his probation was over, which makes sense. It's like a computer hacker not allowed to touch a computer. It makes sense. Now, Carmichael ended up volunteering with the Nevada Gaming Commission to help develop anti-cheating devices that could be used in slots. So again, this is where I draw the parallel between him and, say, Frank Abagnale, who was the forger who ended up working with banks to devise anti-forging safeguards on checks. Well, Carmichael worked with the Nevada Gaming Commission to help them develop anti-cheating materials for slot machines. And his most successful creation is called, it's a very, very clever name, it's called the Protector, that is so good it could block all known cheating devices that people use even to this day. Even to this day, like, this device can block mechanical cheating devices. Now, the Nevada Deputy Attorney General at the time, Jennifer Carvalho, said this regarding Tommy's anti-cheating inventions. Quote, he says he has developed an anti-cheating device for slot machines. However, that device can be readily converted to a cheating device. End quote. So even though he's working with the Nevada Gaming Commission, they obviously don't trust this SOB as far as they can freaking throw him. And to put an exclamation point to that, the Gaming Commission, even though he was working with them to help them develop anti-cheating devices and came up with one that still works to this day, they ended up putting him on the black book. So being put on the black book means that he is never allowed to step foot in any casino in Nevada again. Obviously, there's theoretically nothing preventing him from going to Indian casinos and to Atlantic City and all that, except for the fact that casinos aren't stupid and they all communicate with each other. Nevada casinos, of course, want to know about cheaters in other states and in tribal casinos, and the tribal casinos definitely want to know about cheaters. So there's a lot of communication that people don't know about, I'm sure. I'm just guessing on this. I mean, I don't have any insider information, but it just makes sense. Of course they communicate with each other. There's probably websites that they go to. I mean, I don't freaking know, but they definitely have to communicate with each other. I know that the black book is something that is not exactly a secret. So they all communicate with each other. Now, Tommy's only response to this is, quote, they cannot stand the thought of me righting a wrong and possibly making a little money off of it, end quote. Again, we get into this guy's narcissistic tendencies. I mean, this is all about him and how brilliant he is and how great he is. Unfortunately, he really was that brilliant and really was that great. So, I hope you guys find this interesting, and I hope you guys find this new show that we're going to do weekly interesting. Again, tune in every Thursday, approximately 7 p.m. for our newest episode. The next episodes are probably going to include some cheaters as well. There's a ton of content just in the cheating, and I personally find this interesting, and I think most of our viewers would as well. Please feel free to email us at sincitylivinglv@gmail.com if you have anything else that you think would be interesting, or any questions. Maybe you want us to do some mob-related ones or something along those lines. By all means, let us know. Otherwise, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. We appreciate you guys turning in. Bye now.